You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you to please subscribe to The Authenticity Show wherever you get your podcasts and connect with us on social media. We would love to hear from you. Our guest today is John Briggs of Authentica USA. Authentica, with John Briggs at the helm, helps individuals, teams, and organizations achieve their aspirations of culture, performance, and leader effectiveness. So this is a really fascinating conversation with a really interesting dude, so let's get into it.
All right, so welcome to the Authenticity Show. Satch, it's so good to see you. Good morning, brother.
Hey, good morning. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, happy St. Patty's.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Out with those snakes.
Yeah, representing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this morning we have a friend of a friend who's probably very soon going to be one of our new friends.
Mm-hmm.
And his name is John Briggs, and he has a company called Authentica, which we're going to get into all of that stuff soon. But John, welcome to Authenticity Show.
Hey, thanks for having me, and on such a glorious day. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you both. That's right.
We can't pinch you now. It's too bad.
No. That's right. That's right. Well, and I do have my green running shoes on in honor of you as runners. I thought that. Right. It might behoove me to come into this and instead of breaking bread, we could break stride.
Love it.
Right. Yeah.
That's so cool.
That's great.
Yeah, running's our church. So it's
same page. Right. Same page.
For sure. Great. Well, it's good to get to know you, and already just our pre-talk before we started this, we already feel the vibe. We already feel the similarities here, and it's going to be fun to peek a little deeper and find out more about what you do and who you are, and see what that's like. So yeah, I'm excited.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. That's really awesome. Thanks.
Very cool. And while we're on the topic, so you are a runner as well, then?
I am a retired runner. If I'm being chased, I will definitely still run.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wore myself out. I was a pretty competitive athlete. When I moved to Texas about 20 years ago, I started triathlon since I couldn't mountain bike race anymore.
Wow.
And spent a fair amount of those 20 years doing a lot of racing. And then at some point, I guess it was after Ironman, I just decided, you know what? I think I checked that box. I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. So I don't. Yeah. But if we're ever together, I will find a way to make sure I get some running in beforehand so we can enjoy it. Because it really is. It's about the conversation, the camaraderie, especially with all of the really great healthy chemicals our brains are emitting at the same time. We're spending time shoulder to shoulder with other people that we share lots of interests and insights with. So I totally get why. I get why there's that connection. It's not just the feet on the road.
Absolutely. I mean, even just a good, hour and a half jog through the hills with your buddies at night, which is what we like to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice bit of exercise. It's not a marathon or anything like that, but it's just enough to really feel really good afterward. And love the kinds of conversation that comes out when you are exercising in a pace like that. It's just amazing.
Yeah. I mean, that's we often say that, like most of the topics that we've covered on this show were born out of those conversations of us doing night trail running.
Yes.
And it's interesting because running is work, and it's hard work, but it's play. And that's an interesting thing because it's like I used to hate to run, and then I fell in love with running. And it's interesting because maybe kind of opening, first question for you, is it sounds like the kind of work that you do, with your business involves helping companies, and that's work, right? And I'm kind of wondering, is there an angle here with what you do? Well, first of all, have you explain what you do, but is there an angle there? Do you have to try to help people learn to fall in love with what they do? at work every day? I mean, is that part of it, or are there strategies that help somebody hate it less, like it more? How does that
Yeah,
work? Tell us what you do and how you pull it off.
such a cool question. And yeah, the answer is yes. Yes, for sure.
Oh, that was easy.
So
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, look, can we move on to something more
Yeah,
difficult?
sure. Yeah.
Throw me something I can throw me something I don't struggle to hit right out
I'm
of the
going to
gate.
ask Chat. I'm going to ask
From
Chat
a
GPT. Yeah.
from a real curveball next time, all right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, actually, I found I was having a conversation with someone actually about the measure of emotional intelligence in ChatGPT. And can ChatGPT actually measure someone's emotional intelligence or the EQ, the emotional quotient, when reviewing someone's writing examples of writing descriptions?
Mm.
And it basically spit out this, really, really wonderful answer, but it confused EQ with IQ.
Oh,
So
good.
thankfully enough, for at least for the time being, there is still a place for people who are doing EQ work in the world before
Yes.
ChatGPT takes over. But it's interesting that you bring that up because there is so much information. There's so much data there. Yeah, I think simplicity is a part of when we talk about Authentica.
Mm.
One of the really core values that we have is how do we take the complex and make it simple? And I think that's for a couple of reasons. I've never once claimed to be the smartest guy in any room. I just haven't, right? And I say that in some self-deprecation, but at the same time, it's just you can see the shirt. It's to me, it's less about what is the IQ, more about what is the temperature in the room, right? How are we showing up, and are we showing up at our best? And if we are, how do we help to extend that to others? And so the kind of the simple way of describing what I do is I try to help people be at their best more often, and when they're not, to do less damage. And that
Mm.
answers, I think that's the answer to the question that I wanted to provide, which is sure, maybe it's enjoying work. Maybe it's enjoying the commute home. Maybe it's enjoying the conversation at lunch. Maybe it's enjoying home more because you haven't had a crappy day and you don't come home with all kinds of toxicity and throw up on your loved ones with all the blah of the day. And instead
Mm.
you greet them with, what a wonderful evening. I'm so excited to be home. What have you guys been up to? And think about the difference in the energy level. And
Mm.
all of that comes down to a choice, but that choice has to be made in a really intentional, conscious way. We don't live in that state very often. So helping people understand what that state is and then what your body is telling you about what's happening in the current moment. That's a lot of what I do with companies and sports teams, individuals. It really is about kind of understanding self so that when we do show up, we're able again to show up at our best more often.
Mm.
Well, John, you said um, something about listening to what the body tells you in that moment. Is that a strong component in what you do, the somatic aspects, and if so, how?
For sure. Well, look, we're blessed with lots of complexity with the way that our brains are. You guys both know this far better than I do. And again, if we're trying to make the complex simple, we even just think about the difference between the rational and the limbic, right?
Mhm.
Satch, you've got this wonderful dog who just turned 12 yesterday. What's your dog's name?
Persephone.
What is it again?
Persephone. Like the
Persephone.
goddess Persephone,
Yes,
which
yes.
makes me Zeus since I'm her daddy.
Well,
Yeah.
look at that, right?
That's my
So
ongoing
did you
joke.
even, Carlos, as you saw Satch, just look at his face. First of all, he doesn't carry a lot of stress in his face. It's either because he's got a great med spa doctor or he actually is doing some things that on a daily basis, like running and meditating and things that help us.
Mm.
But you even ask a question like that and you see the light kind of come on. Well, why does the light come on? Well, the light didn't come on because Satch said, when I think of Persephone, I think of, things that make me happy. When I'm happy, I smile. What happened is the limbic responds 100 times faster than our rational minds. So you're never going to outpace, you're never going to outthink the limbic. So if we can pay attention to what the limbic is telling us through our early warning system, which is our body, our physiology, then it gives us some information about how are we treading and where are we treading, right? So why is it that you love Persephone, Satch?
Why is it that I love Persephone? I mean, okay. So I can't say that there are a list of reasons, other than that she is my chosen dog and she loves us unconditionally and we just love her unconditionally, that's it. Where if she's a naughty little puppy, or if she's being fun and she presents me with a toy when she knows I'm stressed, you know it's there's real love. I think interspecies love is like one of those things that's worth living for. I mean, that's what it is, because I feel it. I love her because I feel it.
Right. And Carlos, you and I both know exactly what he means when he says,
100%.
I feel it.
Yeah.
You know what? It's like, hey, Carlos, I like Satch. He seems like a good dude. He gets it. You know exactly what I'm saying, right? Well, it's because language, as you both know, is formatted. It's in our rational minds. It's in the rational center, the cognitive center that's constantly taking in data points and creating some meaning of those data points. Well, the limbic, the language doesn't cross that barrier. So when we say things like, well, because he gets it or she gets it, or because she shows me unconditional love, whether she's a good dog or naughty, right? It's not about the language, because there are all kinds of other animals or things or whatever that could essentially do the same thing you were saying, that you're actually talking about, but it's different. It feels different. And you even use the word feeling, right? And so if we pay attention to how we're feeling, I'm feeling tightness in my chest. I'm feeling my face getting hot. I can feel my heart wanting to pound out of my chest. I feel like I could go for a run right now and run 100 miles. I feel, right? Paying attention, I feel then gives me a sense of, okay, so what system is in charge right now? Is the system in charge the one that's narrowing my thinking to make sure that I can pay attention to any threat that could be in my purview right now? Or am I in a position where I've got sort of all of the possibility, all of that purview, all of that perspective of life, that as I'm taking in these data points, it gives me all these wonderful combination as compared to one combination, one choice in the moment of how to respond or how to show up.
Well, you articulated that so beautifully. It strikes me that you possess the skill of interospection and introspection to a pretty high degree. I know that there are a lot of people that really struggle to identify any aspect of what you just said within themselves, like you ask them the question how they're feeling, or to describe how they're feeling, or even to be in touch with why they might be feeling that way. And it's like doing some kind of advanced physics equation or something that they don't even know how to begin looking. So does that enter into what you do with Authentica? I mean, are you sometimes training individuals and groups in those settings with specific exercises and drills and things like that to help teach people how to do that, or is that not something that you do?
We just tell people what to do and expect them to do it.
Easy, simple. Back to simplicity. Yeah.
I make that as a joke. There's a really, really brilliant model actually from your neck of the woods. There's a group called Partners in Leadership who they wrote a book called The Oz Principle. It was like late 90s kind of stuff. And there's a model in it, a pyramid. It's called the results pyramid. At the top, obviously, are results. So anything we do creates a result. So actions, behaviors drive results. Typically, companies who come to me say, hey, here's our problem. We need this to happen, right? And they have typically tried to say, hey, we want you to do this differently as a company, or we're siloed as functional areas. We've got to break down these silos. So we want you to break down those silos. We want you to start having real conversations. And what happens? Nothing changes. Why? Well, nothing changes because our beliefs drive our actions. So until I have something compelling enough to change my belief set from what it currently is, nothing else is probably going to change. Not that significantly anyways, or not over a period of time. What I need to do is I need to figure out, okay, is there an experience that can be created that drives a new belief set, which now informs my action and behavior and now drives a new result? So when a company says, hey, can you come help us with? Our questions always go back to, okay, so tell us a little bit about what's happening now and what is that gap? And what do you think the belief is that keeps people stuck there? What are the experiences that they've had or not had that have created the way that they're thinking or believing about what's going on. Right. So I had a company in November reach out. I did a keynote in January for them, and they said, we want people to realize that change is good. Okay, that's fair, right? So let's gonna unwind. Let's gonna unwrap this or peel back the onion. And what I found was they're going through this integration, and they've got these really very, very talented groups of people who now some have to figure out how to work as a whole together as compared to these just disparate groups, right? And so, in order to do that, yes, you've got to break down those silos. Yes, you've got to be able to get people in that collaborative mindset, but you can't get them to that collaborative mindset without creating an experience to do so. So, to answer your question a little more succinctly, Carlos, when we think about any of our planning, whether it's a 1-day event or a 3-day or a 4-day event, or a period of time, a cohort series over a year, as an example with high potentials, what we try to do is we think about what are the experiences we create in such a progression that builds both trust and understanding, language, frameworks, so that you can build upon those as you move forward. It's one of the reasons why we always start with emotional intelligence and neuroscience. It's a great way to capture an entire audience, whether you're a systems person and an analyst, somebody who's a historian, someone who's an extroverted extrovert. It sort of doesn't matter. Is you can kind of tap into any persona, any behavioral style, anything that people have interest in, you can tie to, because there's really great scientific data and there's great anecdotal data and there are great stories that go along. But figuring out how to put that into an equation that builds trust over a period of time, so people start to take more and more risks, or what are perceived as risks early on, to then get comfortable with, okay, now I'm paying attention to how I'm feeling. But if we start the day with, okay, everybody pay attention to how you're feeling right now, you see all the barriers going, like, we don't talk about our feelings at work. Right. And so we have to kind of ripen the cause in order to get there. But there's absolutely a way to do that, and we do that through using emotion to our advantage.
I can see how that would be a wall for lots of corporate cultures. Perhaps not all, but I've seen what you're talking about, and I'm just trying to imagine how one would reverse engineer a method of getting them there without triggering all of those defense mechanisms coming up. Because you mentioned even things like uncovering the hidden beliefs behind things, because beliefs drive actions, which I agree. And yet so many people, you ask them, what's the belief behind that? And that's like almost speaking jargon that they don't understand, because they've not gotten used to the idea of tracking backwards towards those specific queries, right? Tracing a line of beliefs to an action and things like that. So how do you bring this home to people who aren't as emotionally intelligent and don't have that kind of background like you do with the training?
Well, so let's stay with you for a second. The way that you again just articulated all of that, you could be sitting in the same position I am. You can walk into any company and see the same things that I see. We're not, you're not in the soup, so you don't have all that emotional connection. You wear a visitor's badge, you walk in, it's like easy to see what's going on. Yeah. Hard when you're there, easy to see when you're not. But you clearly have had experiences in your life that have created a belief set about this kind of work, right? And so, is it any one in particular experience, or is it this accumulation of multiple experiences that have reinforced this belief for you over time? And so, the way we think about it is creating those experiences, but also thinking about that's part of culture. Either aspired culture or current culture. Now, as part of your current culture, whether it was you growing up or as you in your formative years or some exposure within education, there's somewhere where you are kind of exposed to this kind of work, and it clicked. It made sense because of the culture that you were in. Taking the complex and make it simple, we think about culture as 3 simple things. It's our behaved values, not what's on the website or the walls, how people actually show up. So when people talk about, values and behaviors and stuff, I usually, sort of take a sip of water and sit back and say, okay, Are those aspired or are they behaved? And the only way to know that is to observe that, right? And then try to challenge interpretation around it. The second element is a common language, right? So when you use emotional intelligence, are we using the same language, or are we saying, you say emotional intelligence, I think, oh my God, I'm going to talk about like how I feel today, and you think, oh my God, I love all the neuroscience, and I love the idea that if we can override cortisol with serotonin, we can win all day long, right? Those two conversations are so different simply by the way you define the term. And then finally, the last piece of culture is shared stories. The stories we tell or are told of culture define and predict future culture. So it's either stay with the storyline if it's working for you. And if it's not working for you, we've got to create a new storyline, not in a manipulative way. But back to what we had said earlier, I think, Satch, when I was responding to one of your questions, in an intentional and a conscious way, how do we create experiences not out of manipulation, but out of interest in evolving a culture, interest in evolving a group of people, so that they do come home and have a better night at home and a better night's rest, so that they do come back to work with more energy and more vigor, so that they have stronger connections both places, so they're excited to be anywhere at any time with people who they like to spend time with, as you guys are both demonstrating so brilliantly with your green shirts on St. Patrick's Day.
It's a cultural shift we decided to do. We wrote it on the wall.
That's right.
So
that's right.
yeah.
Go ahead, Satch.
Carl. Oh yeah. Okay. So my question is, as you were describing that process, you said like a company might have a particular goal, like we want to break down these silos, or like on your website, our leaders don't know how to lead, basically. I'm not saying that, that's exactly what your website said, but that was kind of like a common theme that you'd see businesses struggle with. How often, or maybe I should say, do you ever get into a situation where you start to get to know them, you start to assess the situation, and you see that maybe you really have to uncover the beliefs at like the highest level, at the CEO's level, the owner of the company's level, where you're thinking, they have an idea about what they think everybody needs, but maybe your assessment is a little different. Is that tricky water to try to navigate?
It can be, and that it's a really, for anybody listening who's going to go and start their own consulting practice or start their own business after leaving the corporate world. I mean, I lived in the corporate world for 20 years, or a little over 20 years, right? So I stepped away from that environment, and that wasn't something that was kind of square in my belief window as I started out. So I would say yes to everything. And what I realized was that's a horrible way to run a business. It might be a way to make money on a certain day, but if I'm going to say, here are the results you can expect, I have to know that the infrastructure is in place to support and extend those results. Otherwise, it's just a dog and pony show, right? And so I'll have that conversation up front. I think the other piece, Satch, goes back to the experience creation. So both of you, very quickly, think of one of the most exceptional leaders you have ever worked with, ever worked for. They call you up this afternoon and say, I need you on my team for this. And you immediately say, anything, yes. Give me your first name.
James.
Elizabeth.
I hope James and Elizabeth are listening, because people who sit in that space don't hear it enough. And so if they're not going to be listening, would you both do me a favor, and before the end of St. Patrick's Day, send them a note that said, you know what, I mentioned you today on this podcast. Whether you want to listen or not, it's up to you. But I want you to know you are appreciated. Now, if you were to give me 3 or 4 words to describe James and 3 to 4 words to describe Elizabeth, why they were so exceptional as leaders, or why they are, what words come to mind?
Competent, authentic, genuine.
For Elizabeth, I would say it was deep knowledge, patience, and she listened long enough to really understand the problem.
Awesome. How fun is it when you have somebody like that? And we all have that person we can think of that, like, oh yeah, I pick up the phone and I just love talking to. Mine's Jason, right? And I will make sure he knows to listen, right? So Jason does this particularly well. I know as I talk to him, I almost feel guilty because he's asking so many good questions. I can't wait to get to questions for him, right? So there's a way that these people leave us feeling. Now, when we talk about James being, what was the first word? Was it?
It was competent. I mean,
Competent.
he's a
Okay.
brilliant,
Competent,
human
yes.
being.
So competent, authentic, and genuine.
Yeah.
Of those three words, which of those three words have to do with IQ alone? Simply how smart someone is. You couldn't do it without having high IQ.
Competent.
Competent. So there's some level of IQ there. Technical expertise in any job, anything we do.
Right.
Competent, probably, right? Yeah. Authentic and genuine still sit out there in this unknown space. And we go to Elizabeth, deep knowledge, again, back to technical and IQ. But then when you start talking about levels of patience, that listening long enough, staying on the road, not taking the first exit that most of us take, not even taking the second exit some of the best take, but staying on long enough to really get it, has nothing to do with IQ, has nothing to do with technical skills, it has everything to do with our EQ, our emotional quotient, which can be learned because what you've talked about are just a pattern of behavior that you've paid attention to, picked up on, and then interpreted as genuine and authentic, as patient, right? Now, Elizabeth may have no patience. Elizabeth, we know you have patience. But maybe she's just a brilliant actress, or she's in Never Neverland. She's thinking about something completely different, spaced out and not thinking. But if you think she's listening, you're tuned in. There's a difference in that bond. And it's because of that behaved value from her side. So if I have CEOs or I have a C-suite that responds in this way, and I say, what do you want more of? Do you want more deep knowledge? Do you want more competence? Or do you want more patience, more ability to understand, more authenticity, if they answer anything on the EQ side, it sounds like a brilliant partnership, right? From my perspective. If it's the technical and that just says, okay, this is not the perfect working relationship, as no relationship is, right, for everybody, and you move on. But what Goleman taught us, even though IQ is determined by about the age of 12 or 13, and most companies spend 95% or plus of their budgets, training budgets, on technical training, competency stuff, skills, that this EQ component can be learned. We look at Steve Jobs. I don't know if you ever saw his Stanford address, 20.
Yeah, I saw it.
6 or 08, something like that.
Yeah.
His Stanford commencement address. If there's anybody who demonstrated this leap in the emotional quotient, at least through that speech, it's Steve Jobs. Here's a guy who gets fired from his own company, and then he's standing in front of Stanford graduates and talking about these most important things to consider for their lives, and then nothing has to do with Apple or iPads or iPhones or technology. Nothing.
Right? Or even necessarily the way he used to behave toward his former employees.
Yeah. Right.
But that speech was really spot on, though.
Left it. Yeah, totally. Right.
It was. Yeah. And so even our understanding, so, you had said something earlier, and I held back on kind of cutting a joke right out of the gate about, it looks like, based on the way that we're even having this conversation, clearly you're somebody who practices this stuff. Yes, I practice it. And you ask my wife, and I am definitely not perfect. And in fact, she might question. I certainly do some days when I show up and I'm like, man, I teach this stuff. How can I get this so wrong today? Right. And the idea is that we're human beings. So we're never going to be at our best all the time. And so that's why, if you can figure out what keeps me at my best, when I'm in control, when I'm appreciated, when I'm valued, I'm at my best. So if I know I'm putting myself in an environment where that's happening, that's one key. Okay, so now I know I can be at my best. Possibility is there. If I walk into a situation and I know I'm not going to be at my best, I know that there's something that's compromised, I can at least be paying attention to my physiology saying, hey, look, you start to feel a heart rate go up. It means something's happening. You may not show up at your best. It might be better to sit back and observe today.
Hmm.
1 time out of 10 on either side of that equation. Could you imagine if the entire world was better 1 more time out of 10 and did less damage 1 more time out of 10? What would be the result? So we don't have to be perfect. It's just about being better more often.
Wow, that's great. It's like the first rule of medicine. First, do no harm. It's like, yeah, that's beautiful. First, I love the idea of what keeps me at my best. But I really love that second piece, which is, at least don't damage anything today, because I recognize I'm not at my best. And sometimes I've done it, gone through long stretches where I clearly know I'm not at my best, and if I reflect on it, I can tell that when I start moving the chess pieces around when I'm not at my best, it does cause damage. And when I recognize that, I'm not really capable of making this decision right now, I better outsource it to like my most trusted colleagues and just say, hey, look, I don't know what to do about this. How do you see this? You know what I mean? and like, I might be the manager in that moment and I'm seeking the advice of people below me, or I might be talking to people that are my managers. You know what I mean? And but I think taking the complexity of that whole topic and making it simple, like you did, which we talked about earlier, just take complex and make it simple, right? I love that simplicity. Am I at my best or not? Okay,
Yeah.
at least don't screw things up.
Well, and the do no harm. I mean, what a brilliant parallel. Because when I talk with companies about partnerships, I talk about, look, this is really important that we're clear on this. That this partnership means that when we are engaged, that this investment, not just financial investment, the investment of time, the investment of prioritization, that when someone goes to a course or someone's at a cohort and they're away for a couple of days from the office, they're able to be away. They're allowed to be away to learn, to be able to do what they do. They be able to let go of the technical day-to-day stuff that occupies our thinking brain and be able to transition that into a space where people are using their thinking brains in ways to continue to develop and evolve. One of the very first things I talk about is none of it. Do not make a move anywhere. Don't add a values program or a appreciation program or a leadership development program. Don't do anything until people feel safe. Nothing. Right? Because if people don't feel safe, they're not going to be at their best. And they're not going to have the capacity to hear. To Elizabeth's point, Elizabeth couldn't listen to understand if she was compromised by her rational brain. It's because she's got the wherewithal to be able to really tune in, right? And so people don't feel safe, they can't tune in. And so, you've never heard somebody like, imagine Carlos at a, Tuesday as being inside a burning building saying, I'm not leaving this building until someone shows me some respect. All right, well, do you, man? I'm out of here, right? but we don't consciously think about that. That's all limbic. It's all a deeper response that is covered up by all kinds of BS of our, growing up and experiences and all kinds of stories we tell about those default behaviors. But the fact is, we have them. And if we can understand that there are some default behaviors that, yes, they do keep us safe, and there are some that they're intended to keep us safe, but they actually create more of a challenge than if we didn't do anything at all. Well, those are good decision points. And that's a decision point a compromised rational brain can make. It can decide between, do I want to try this, which I've done before 4 or 5 other times just like this, and I know what the movie looks like. It's not a good result. Or do I want to try something different today? Black and white, binary choice. If I'm compromised by a cortisol hijack, if I'm compromised by stress and complexity, I can make a binary choice. I may not be able to think in complexity and say, what are the myriad of possibilities that I have right now? That comes later, right? But first is understanding, what is my initial default? Am I a attacker, or am I a retreater? If I'm an attacker, probably best case scenario is maybe press pause. If I'm a retreater, maybe it's looking at, why do I continue to retreat? And is this the time that I need to use my voice? Right?
Mhm.
And preparing to use that voice for that moment when that feeling comes is what you then have in an empowered introvert. The people in our world have everything we need to hear and we don't hear enough from.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Wow. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Earlier, we've this. I loved earlier when we first started, and you were talking. You had said that you don't go into the room and think you're the smartest person in the room, and you were talking about simplicity, and it made me think of Taoism a lot. About the sage being simple, and I think maybe this is a new thing that could catch on is to strive to be the simplest man in the room. In a way, you know what I mean? The idea of simplicity, of non-complexity, um, it kind of like,
How would your world be different?
I'm
How
sorry.
would your world be different if there was more of that in your world? I mean, think about like how you live every day.
Yeah.
How would your world be? How would your world be different?
Yeah. Gosh. Honestly, that's such a good question. Um, if I would be content more often to be the simplest guy in the room, or if others around me would be content to be the simplest guy or gal in the room, I think answers would come quickly. I think answers wouldn't be or solutions wouldn't be agonized over. Choices, we wouldn't agonize over them. You know what I mean? It just seems like it'd be efficient and smooth and pleasant. And I think the results would be better.
What that would require is an adaptation. I mean, a species adaptation, right? That's just not a technical. There's a lot of the work I do is around adaptive leadership, also, which is one of the Kennedy School programs at Harvard. Ron Marty Linsky and Ron Heifetz, and they talk about distinguishing the difference between a technical problem and an adaptive. And what we're talking is about an adaptation, which means we got to really understand more about the problem before we ever get to any kind of a solution. We really got to kind of steep in that kind of the ickiness, the muckiness of all of that.
Mhm.
A lot of people aren't willing to do that, or they don't think they're willing to do it, or they don't have the skills or the tools. This is stuff. If we just started teaching it in elementary school, I think we'd be a whole lot better off. Because the way we survive adulthood is the way we survive childhood. We just dress it up to look more complex, but it really is the same thing. The way that we all do, right? And so, yeah, I love what you said about that, because it ultimately, I work with for-profit organizations, which means results are why you're coming to me, which is what we should be putting up in a partnership. Well, if we can teach your people to be more authentic, more open to taking risks, more open to hearing people, especially when ideas may be complementary or potentially even feel opposing. They may not be opposing, but feel opposing in the moment. To have a little Elizabeth in that moment and resist the urge to respond to, wait, that changes everything that I want to do, to, if I'm going to listen a little bit longer, because maybe I pick up something here that is a game changer for this entire thing. And if I stay in the game right now, there are other people that are checked out. If I'm the one who stays in the game, I win. Right. And that's what you think about, how many boardroom conversations go around and around and around and around. And then we schedule another meeting to do the same thing again. And what it would take is one or two people in that room to recognize, okay, there's a reason why we keep going in circles. It's because the conflict in the room is not resolved, because people don't feel safe, because people don't want to give something up in the service of progress. So let's start there before we start having the conversation about what needs to change, right? All of this, though, still fundamentally comes from people who have created an environment or a culture where I feel safe enough to voice this kind of thing,
Mhm.
right? To actually have that conversation. And that has to start with modeling right at the top.
Yeah. Wow.
Otherwise,
Safety. Yeah.
you create from all of that. If you don't, you have the bored room. You literally have people in there who are just looping over and over again, and they're bored out of their minds. And
Mhm.
that's what happens. But what you're just suggesting actually is bringing online everyone's genius. I mean, it's allowing them to be present to what's happening now and to address it specifically in the thoughts and beliefs, and how solutions are approached with presence, in a sense, full
So
present awareness.
yeah. So let's take this as an example. Let's say we're in a meeting. We're in a meeting with everybody else who's listening right now, and Satch says something that he throws you under the bus a little bit, right? Doesn't mean to, not an intention, right? But it feels like it to you, and so you kind of shut down and you're not really listening, and you're pseudo engaged. And then we leave the meeting, and you call me up, and you're like, "Can you believe? Seriously, can you believe Satch said that?" I'm like, man, maybe you guys should edit that out. And we spent some time talking about it. Let's just play the rest of the day out, right? It's 11 o'clock Pacific time or something. And how long do you think you'll be thinking about that comment that Satch makes? How much more of the day do you think you're going to spend on that comment? A couple hours, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Especially if you're going to have a conversation. You already know you're meeting Satch tonight at 5 o'clock because you guys have to have a meeting about something else.
Mhm.
Okay, now I'm now not only thinking about it, but I'm also putting together my plan of action to address it, right? And so, 7 hours, 8 hours later, you guys meet, and Satch says, "Oh man, that came out wrong. I meant to say something in the moment, I forgot, but that just totally came out wrong. Here's what I meant." And then you look back and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I just spent 7 hours." That's that's not that's not an exaggeration, but let's cut that in half. So let's say it's 3.5 hours, and you have one of those a week, which means 14 hours a month, which is 160-ish. Again, I told you I was never the smartest guy in any room. So look, we're talking about how many days with 40 days? 40 days in a year. So could you imagine going to your boss and saying, "Hey, look, I know I get 3 weeks of vacation, but next year I'm going to take an extra 40 days. And I'm going to use that time for me to be stressed, to think about the things that really aren't important, to get other people wound up about it, be distracted from my work, and probably not put the results up that you want. But the rest of the time, I'm telling you, I'm going to nail it." Right? So a company wants to take on results, take on the EQ piece, right? And the thing is, it can always get better. It's not, you don't ever achieve, you don't ever land at that moment. It's something that continues to get better and stronger over time, culturally, within teams, within groups, within organizations. And so even if at this point it's not happening that often, it's only happening a quarter as often. Well, we're still talking about results and how results are impacted by the way that we, tell stories. And so, again, the more that we can, instead of the phone call to me, immediately in the moment or after the call, for us to stay on and for you to say, "Hey, Sash, before we go, you made this comment, and I immediately wanted to judge you. So recognize I'm coming to you with curiosity right now, and it's not fair to judge you because I never asked you what your intention was. Can you help me help me understand your intention behind that comment? Well, now you get the intention, because we judge ourselves by our intention. Everybody else judges us by impact.
Mm.
So until we get to either aligned or recognize they're misaligned just because of some behavioral misinterpretation or communication misinterpretation, which is 90% of the time, we're going to continue to have these conflicts. We're going to continue to tell stories all day long. We're going to continue to live in cortisol, and we're going to continue to, be stressed in the worlds that we live in. Or we can choose a more simple option, which is, well, if it doesn't make sense, what would you have done when you were 4? Before you learned that you're not supposed to ask questions? Satch, if you're my manager and you tell me you don't know something, aren't you going to lose credibility?
Right.
That's
Right.
historical thinking.
Exactly.
But there are a lot of people. Look, the C-suite doesn't know how to answer every challenge. But if they tell the company, hey, look, we're not really sure how to do this. This whole DE&I thing didn't really go as well as we expected. We're not really sure what to do about it. So, we'll get back to you, or we'll put a suggestion box up. I mean, no one's going to do that, right? Because they're afraid of, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to my credibility? Because we bank all of this stuff on what we know versus our level of curiosity. Imagine having both. Like, that's a sweet spot. And again, back to the people that you named with James and Elizabeth, my guess is those people lived in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a lot about paying attention to the body, and about in a sense reading the room, and knowing that you're not going to get the richest answers from people if they feel unsafe. One of the things that James does so well is that he's got an extremely intuitive sense of what's going on with every single person in the room. And he pays attention to the moment that someone's inner conflicts seem to come up, because, as the excellent trainer that he is, he knows that that's going to be in the way of learning unless it's resolved. So he's very good at navigating that and adapting his plan for teaching in a brilliant way that adjusts to the tides and the currents that are actually happening in the moment. And I got a chance to witness that many, many times with him, of how he is able to be so flexible and resourceful, because he understands that, at an embodied level, how important that is. And he sees it in others. So it's a quality that's just reinforcing all the things that you're saying, really.
I know which James you're talking about now.
Yes, you do.
I do. Yeah. Okay, that's great.
Example of that.
Totally agree. Yeah.
That's the beauty even in this exercise. Because ultimately, when we do get our thinking minds back, after we go through our hijack, someone says something nasty, a nasty email comes through, whatever it is, right? Once we kind of get our thinking minds back, one of the things we can do is we can, again, go to what is my default behavior. And in the work that I do, I have a diagnostic that helps people actually walk through and say, oh, wow, I didn't realize I even did these things physically, through language, through conversation. But we also don't pay attention to what the results of those default behaviors are. And if we can simply just pay attention to, okay, so what is that default? And that's one movie. The other movie is my James movie. Which movie do I want to play out? I can play the James movie out. I've already seen it. I've got James. It's like I have old man Sakamoto. It's one of my old bosses in my head. And I'll make sure he listens. I constantly can hear his voice saying things, right? Hey, Briggs, and he'd use a lot of expletives. I won't use expletives on your show. Hey, Briggs, don't F this up. You all right, well, you fuck this up, and you're going to fuck up you're probably going to fuck up your entire career. I mean, he said this before I went up in front of 500 people. Yeah. And what he was saying is, man, you got this. You're confident. I've seen you practice, right? But if he came to me based on our relationship and said, hey, you know what? You've been practicing. I've been watching. You're prepared. I would have been like, what's wrong, right? Because our relationship was different. He had that kind of sarcasm and way of communicating. But again, if we're able to communicate in the moment how we hope people to experience us, and that's aligned with our impact, then that's that leadership moment where James is getting more often right than he is getting wrong. And it's why you put him on that board. And James has somebody on his board, and that person has somebody on their board. The other side of the equation is we all probably end up on the other board at some point in time, because we create experiences for people, and not all the experiences we create are great ones. Right. And so if I create 2 experiences for you and they're both crappy experiences, well, where am I going to end up? Am I going to end up on that board, or am I going to end up on the opposite board? Again, that's where the do less damage piece comes in.
Well, and you touched upon conflict resolution, which is a topic that deeply interests me, very much so. So is that something that you directly get into with people, or is it more something that's peripheral to it and just connected to what you do?
Well, for sure. It's depending on kind of the enrolled work, right? There are lots of good conflict resolution programs out there, Crucial and all those kinds of things. And I've got those certifications. I still think simplicity is a whole lot better. We can just teach people how to use that language and actually have them practice that. I came back after one of my first EQ exposures back in 2004, 2005, and I was having conflict with this woman. We'll call her Lisa. That's what we're going to call her. And it was somebody I worked with. We sort of competed. She would move up, I would move up. We were kind of on the same teams, and so we ended up on this global team, and we would see each other every couple of weeks. And she just every time that would come to me to give an update, her hand would go up, and I get thrown under the bus. And I mean, 2 by forehead every single time. And so I came back after one of these programs. I said, I wanted to use this intention impact language. And so I kind of played it out there for her. Hey, here's what's happened. And, I've never asked you about it, and I've gone to judgment. That's not fair. I'm curious. Because she starts laughing at me. I'm in her office. She starts laughing at me. And now I'm like, whoa, what's going on? I'm so confused. She said, you never call. Because I didn't want to collaborate with her. I didn't want to innovate with her. I didn't want to work with her. We would do separate things on the same project, put it together and say we worked together, but we didn't really. And so when I came to her, she said, you never pick up. I said, what do you mean? She said, you know how many times I've tried calling you to give you this feedback and you haven't picked up? Well, why? Because I see her calling and I look, I'm like, yeah, like I'm going to answer her call, click. So whose behavior is driving that situation? It wasn't Lisa. Even if there was some kind of malice, which there wasn't, she just didn't have time to get to me. So when is she going to give me the feedback otherwise? Right. So we have a share of our own mess. And I think being able to understand, all right, we're human beings and that's going to be part of the game, but leaving the mess and staying with the mess, if that's your choice, then you're going to continue to have the same experiences you're having over and over and over. The cycle is going to continue until the challenge or the problem becomes significant enough to say, I need to take this on. And that actually leads to the conversation we were having a little bit earlier about the Covered Bridge program and life transitions and how we as human beings experience life transitions. And some of those life transitions go really well and some of them go horribly wrong. And so understanding what our share of that mess is, I think, is a really important part. And it's going to be a part of my next 20 years, for sure.
Well, what are some life transitions? Just to kind of give people an idea what you're referring to.
Yeah. Well, there's some great writing out there. By the way, there's Bruce Feiler has a couple of really great books. Joanne Lippman has a book called Next. You can even go back to the Heath brothers from Stanford and Switch from many years ago, which is a book on change. And there are lots of really good literature on life transitions like career transitions, divorce, going from high school to college, going from college to working. Being an NFL athlete, a football player since the age of 4, and now a 28-year-old retired athlete because I blew a knee out. Right that's a transition. So anytime we go through any kind of change in our life that sort of fundamentally shifts certain elements, and I actually identified these 4 elements. Those 4 elements are an impact on our identity and our purpose, right, which is kind of the EQ, the emotional side, the self side. And then the other side of that equation is the need for human connection and the need for community, right? The social piece. And so anytime either one of those is interrupted or disrupted, then that typically creates some challenges in a life transition. The part that I started to understand in doing the research is, first of all, there's far more research on why transitions don't go well versus why they go well. And so I decided to study the first and then follow up with how do we create something out of what we know works. But Bruce Feiler's got a quote. He talks about certain life transitions as life quakes, right? And life quakes come, and some life quakes are a 1 or a 2. You guys are Californians. You're used to feeling the walls shake and watching, pictures, wondering if the next thing is going to topple over, right?
Totally.
And then some of them come and they bring the rubble, and they can come multiple in one series of time, right? And so that's why I decided that that if we can solve for those moments by giving people the skills and the tools that they need, that they probably already have, they just don't realize they have them yet because of what they've experienced in their life, because of what they've learned how to endure already. But if we can build on that in a really healthy way and give healthy options, healthy opportunities for default behavior, healthy opportunities for relationship rebuilding and repair, and the ability to be able to kind of look at life as a series of chapters, and recognize that there are some chapters that involve certain things, certain people, certain events, and there are some of those chapters in our lives that don't. And that's our reality, right? To be able to kind of recognize all of that, I think, is a really important part of that life transition work. And so it does start with those 4, what I call the 4 tethers, that keep us grounded like we would be in a hot air balloon: our identity, our purpose, our community, and our need for human connection. That's where we've got to. That's what we've got to start paying attention to.
I like that. I like those 3. Yeah.
I love it too. I mean, and community and human connection are like purpose in the sense that it gets into what we think of as what is beyond us as an individual.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you can't have a purpose without having an individual self, but the idea itself implies something that connects you to everyone else.
That's right. Which informs, to your point, informs community. That the community it informs me to is going to also then inform the satisfaction of human connection. So am I getting what I need from human connection, or am I just getting human connection? I mean, the emotionally abused kid at school gets human connection, but it doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Right.
So how is it that we put ourselves in a position to reduce toxicity, to increase gratitude, try increase the sort of the nature of being around people who are genuine and authentic? I mean, when we first started talking today, there's a feeling I get when I talk with you guys. Why? Well, because of the way that you show up, because of your demeanor, because of the things, the little things that we're picking up on in the background. And again, if we're able to explore what makes us who we are, and why we've been successful and how we've been successful and all of that, but really get down to root cause. And I mentioned it earlier, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's why it takes some time to actually do this work, but it doesn't have to be complex. If we can get down to root cause being, okay, I'm having a lot of conversations right now with professional athletes. And the professional athlete says, I've been a football player since the age of 4. I wanted to play in the NFL since I was 4 years old. I'm 28. I've just blew both knees out. I'm out. The game is over, right? So it's not that the football player's identity truly is, I'm a football player. Or their purpose is, I play football so that I can win games, right? There's something behind all of that that's satisfying them from an emotional needs perspective. And you heard me mention control, appreciation, and value earlier. For some people, it's fairness and safety and being included. And for others, it's being shown respect and having the power to make a decision or to be heard, right? If we can identify what are those things for us that have kept us in our sweet spot, then when we start thinking about what am I going to do with my community, how am I going to see my purpose and meaning played out, when am I going to get that that human connection that I need? Well, if it's aligned to those root causes, meaning if I'm going to volunteer in the community, and you guys know that control, being in control, having appreciation, and feeling valued is the best spot for me, and you're running a soup kitchen, where are you going to put me? Are you going to put me in the back scooping green beans by myself? Or are you going to put me in the front welcoming in the people who don't have the wherewithal today to pay for this meal?
Right.
Well, right? Because you know where I'm going to walk away from that experience saying, man, I'm going to do that every Tuesday. In fact, I'm going to start doing it Tuesdays and Thursdays. As compared to, I don't think I'm going to do that again. Scooping green beans is not my thing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we find that now we've got all of these brilliant connections that people like you, at some point, you're going to decide, I'm going to do something different for the next chapter of my life. So how could you take everything that you know and everything that you've learned that's helped you with your success to this point, take that and put it into a new environment where you're satisfied by these needs, and you bring that to a new place, a new community, a new world. Man, again, this is where we really start to have an impact on the universe. We put a dent in the universe with this kind of stuff.
Wow, really cool.
Wow.
But the name of your company, Authentica, I mean, there's an obvious synergy between our names. I mean, the Authenticity Show and Authentica. How did you come up with that name, and what drew you down that pathway?
Well, so it starts with what was the prior name? So the prior name was Catalyst One Global. I was in Copenhagen, and I was 6 weeks away from starting my own business. I had already had a conversation with the company I was working at 6 months earlier that I was working on this project for general managers, and it wouldn't be until I finished it that I would exit. So the timeline was kind of fuzzy, but I knew it was about 6 weeks, and I had to create an LLC. I had to have a name, and I was in Denmark, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I like Catalyst. I'm doing global work. I couldn't do Catalyst Global. It was taking, so I took Catalyst One Global. I mean, it's literally, and I was never in love with the name. But it wasn't until 2018, 2019 that it was really coming to the conversation that it clearly you guys have had around who are we and what do we want to represent as we bring people into to expose them to our audience. And we and a few of us wrote down all of the words that seem to be part of why we do what we do and how we want to show up and how we want to be known and what is the reputation that someday becomes our legacy. It was pretty clear that being authentic is really important to us. And if that works for you, then it's going to be a great partnership. And if it doesn't work for you, then I think we've identified that up front and we didn't waste anybody's time. That's really good news too.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, go. I was just going to say we mention this periodically, but one of the things that is important about our name is not just the being genuine and authentic in that sense, like knowing the self and kind of living from that place, which is implied by that name, but also the other definition, which includes the idea of being self-authoring, and that's a form of like discovering what your purpose is and actualizing it, and stepping out and improvising and being capable of making mistakes, capable of failing, capable of going into the unknown with curiosity. And I love that idea of being self-authoring, and everything you're talking about reminds me of those qualities that you'd be developing as a person, becoming a more effective leader and expanding your leadership capacities because of what you're doing. That you're not only discovering what's genuine underneath, but you're empowering yourself to embody it as a path that you can be practicing the authenticity in the sense of writing your own story, recognizing that you have already been doing that, kind of seizing back the control over the authorship, and then beginning to pen, new chapters, new stories. So that's of big importance for me and for Satch about why we do what we do, and what you're talking about seems very in line with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, my dad's a wise guy. He's taught me a lot of
He's in the
important things.
mafia?
Right, exactly. As soon as it came out, and that was the bad dad joke that I could hear him saying, like, really, you had to say I was a wise guy or the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
But my background's in education, and when I was doing my student teaching in college, my whole family, I kind of come from a family of educators, And my dad said two things to me. He said, "Who are the two most important people in the school?" Easy, right? Principal and vice principal.
Student teacher.
Who do you think they are? Who would you have said?
Student and teacher.
Okay. So in a very similar vein, he said at that point, I think the school administrative assistant was called the secretary. He said the school secretary, administrative assistant, and the head custodian. They know everything that's going on in that school. They have the key to every door in that school. And there are people who are overlooked every single day that people don't value. So start there. Start with valuing them. Start with recognizing them as human beings, and just recognize that it wasn't a manipulative conversation. It was just be clear about who really does the work around here, and pay them some respect, show them some, right. And that was brilliant. One of the kind of brilliant lessons. The other one, though, that is really apropos to this situation is the greatest teachers are also the greatest thieves. They see something they love, they steal it, and they put it in their pocket and make it their own. So I will give you credit once, Carlos, for your conversation about being self-authoring. From there, I think it'll become mine, and forever people will think of it as mine. Right? No,
Right.
and again, I make a joke, but I love that. You're absolutely right, and again, that kind of feels like where, even in my own sort of quest, my own journey through these, sort of chapters that bring things that we are kind of unexpected. That this is actually, it's brilliant. I really appreciate this. This is a point in my life where that needs to be in my purview. That needs to be in my belief window more often. Really, really like that. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding me to channel my inner Elizabeth, because I sometimes channel the wrong superhero for the situation. Maybe I'm trying to challenge my inner Alan Watts or my inner Buddha, when I need to be challenging my inner Elizabeth, because this is a different scenario. So I'm going to be stealing that. Thank you.
Which gave me an idea, even around the default diagnostic, right? Which is, we are the villains when we show up in ways that we're not proud of, and we all have them. I call them bow tut moments. Beware of the ugly truth. The stuff like you don't want to tell anybody, but I did some stupid shit today. Right? That's when we're the villain, right? But we know what the superhero looks like. So if we can just get to the movies, I just need a ticket to get into the movie to see it. If I see it, I know how to do it. So that ticket is, again, recognizing, okay, something's going on. There's my ticket. That's all I need. I don't need to know what's going on. That'll come later. I need the ticket to be able to see the movie. That's brilliant. Love it. Elizabeth, the superhero. Little did she know that she and James would be the center of a really cool conversation.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I'll wrap up my final thought on Elizabeth by sharing an interaction that I had with her that changed me, and not only changed me, but gave me information to teach hundreds and hundreds of students forever. It had a huge impact. I used to work at a skilled nursing facility. I'm an occupational therapist, so I was doing therapy, for geriatric therapy. And for the first couple of years that I was there, I kept hearing from everybody, hey, if your stroke patients, if they need a splint, when they're under Medicare Part A doesn't pay for the splint. So you got to wait until they exhaust their Medicare Part A. And then if they have Medicare Part B, then we'll bill for a splint and we'll get a splint. That's what I kept hearing. And I was so frustrated about that. I spent 2 years irritated about that one topic. Makes no sense. Why do they have to, they got to wait 100 days before they can get a splint when they need a splint now? Like, and just like the system sucks, and you know what I mean? And why is it this way? And I asked Elizabeth about this. I'm like, why is it like this, Elizabeth? And she had this great South African accent. Well, I'll tell you. Right. And then she explained to me that what I had been told is inaccurate, but a common misbelief. She said Medicare Part A pays this amount of money for every patient every day that's in the facility, and that money is meant to cover all of their needs. She said, that money should pay for the splint. So she said, all you have to do is go to the administrator of the building, make a case for why the patient needs a splint. And they'll probably tell you every time, yeah, go ahead and go have Central Supply order the splint you want. And I was like, really? Because this is not this went against everything everybody had told me. I went to the administrator, who was a super cool guy. And when you tell the administrator of the building that, I really think this person needs a splint, I found a relatively inexpensive one that would work. Would it be okay if I ordered it? Because then I could use it every day, and it would really help our therapy. He's like, of course. Like, yeah. I mean, we don't want to not give somebody a splint if they need a splint. And I was like, and from that point on, I got a splint for every stroke patient that needed a splint. And then I taught hundreds and hundreds of students this same principle. I said, you think your patient needs something, tell the person in charge who's holding the keys to the it's what was it, $70, and then now they have a splint you could use forever. And that's a little bit of a complicated, industry specific example, but it changed my frustration and like irritation at the entire system and the building and the way the whole system works, to feeling empowered to the point where I could go straight to the administrator of the building, the highest guy in the building, and have a real simple, easy conversation. Hey, it's another patient that I really think needs a splint. Hey, absolutely, do your thing. And everybody was blown away. They're like, you got a splint for that? I'm like, yeah. Because that's not how the system actually works. Everybody was wrong. And it took Elizabeth listening, and she had, like I said, deep knowledge about how everything works. And these are the secret motives behind what she told me was everybody what a lot of people were doing was keeping the money. And then once somebody else would pay for the splint, let them pay for the splint. And it was like, it's only $60-$70, right? And it's good, so that was kudos to Elizabeth.
Wow.
Well, it's a really beautiful representation of the difference between authority and leadership, from my perspective.
Yeah,
and I've got my own viewpoint. Noel Tichy, who's from Ross School of Business, former professor there, had this whole thing around journey lines and teachable point of view and so forth. And I've got a very clear teachable point of view on this. What she demonstrated in that moment was authority. She showed protection, direction, and order.
Mm-hmm.
Right? She would not have sent you into the lion's den without knowing that you were going to be safe. She gave you some insight that might give you some sense of where to go from here. And she even helped probably how do you organize this and who is it that you start with, right? The protection, direction, and order. However, it took leadership for anything to happen, because in your scope of authority, nowhere did it say that you have the authority to go to somebody higher than you and to request something that's outside of the common guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until you took that moment. So I think that's the beauty of the dynamic of leadership. Is people talk about exercising leadership. Exercising leadership is great, but you've also got to have an authority that's going to be tolerant, or at least you're smart enough to test the waters with something that can be tolerant. You're not going in and saying, I need splints. I need 100 splints here on Tuesday. You said, I researched, I looked for one that was less expensive, and this is one that based on my research, this is important. You got the green light. Well, that's fantastic. That's a step in the right direction, and that's what leadership does, is leadership takes a step in the right direction, but then there's more to go. So the fact that other people hear your story likely gives them the same level of confidence to exercise leadership. And that, again, back to leadership in general, leadership is not something anybody does. Leadership is a verb. It's not a noun, right? I'm not a leader, right? Exercise leadership. And so that means other people will exercise leadership. And I can't do it all the time because it's a dangerous proposition. You can't go every day to this person and say, I need this now. I need this now. At some point, you're going to get the oust because it's not in your scope. But if there are people in the organization who are all thinking this way, talk about all ships rise, right? All ships are going to rise on this one. And the story now that permeates is, Did you hear what happened with Satch when he went and asked for this splint? What changed culturally? Well, now there's a glimpse of hope culturally to say when we're talking about Medicare Part A and Part B, there's a glimmer of hope in this organization that we can do something that's not as traditional as some other organizations. You create 10 more of those experiences, and you're going to have people knocking down every door they can to work for your company. It's not complex, but it is intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And,
beautiful. That's a great summary.
Absolutely. You gentlemen both gave stories that prompted this point that I'd like to point out, which is that, beyond the individual problem. So in Satch's case, there was this problem of feeling at odds with the system and frustrated, and it was solved by allowing that feeling to be present, and then to share it with someone to share it with the right person.
Mm-hmm.
That was a moment of seeking resourcefulness that you maybe didn't feel at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but you created a bridge, and then that leader gave that specific solution. And in John's example with that old coworker who there was this competitive feeling in there, the pain inside of you, John, caused you to then confront her, which in turn revealed this other truth, this other aspect that opened your eyes to a bigger picture. And so in both cases, a couple things happen, at least from my perspective. One is, from a broader perspective, we often forget that problems are solutions. We get stuck in the problem state and all of the frustration and pain around that we forget that the solution's just imminent if we allow ourselves to get outside of the thinking that we were once in, right? And if we could remember that moving forward, it would contribute to our feeling of resourcefulness and resilience when things get difficult, and put us in a state where we could think through and strategize and discover new resources and solve it. Just simply by taking the attitude that problems are solutions, or that they're solutions waiting to happen, and it's just about the second piece, which I'll now call expansion, right? So the first one was looking at it as problems are solutions, and maybe remembering that so that we stay just a little bit resourceful working through them. And the second part is that idea that all of the solutions, or let's say all of the problems that we experience, are problems because, metaphorically speaking, we are smaller than we need to be. When we expand our point of view, when we expand our behavior adaptations, when we expand our thinking, we tend to open up to solutions that were formerly not accessible. So expansion is this principle that seems to fit all across the board with every problem, with every solution, is just the idea of expanding. If we can just think of that primary movement of expansion, and how expansion is really the solution to almost everything, I think that's also a helpful key, because we can move forward without specific knowledge of how to solve our problems. But if we remember the principle, that principle could lead us back to multiple solutions or multiple resources. Anyway, thoughts?
Yeah, no, so well said. So well said. And I love where you started with self, right? Because that's where it has to start. It's the oxygen mask. They put on the oxygen mask first. I think the beauty in what you just said is the end. And the end on top of that is, now imagine a group of people. Imagine a company, a culture that's thriving because there are people in it. Not one. I love it. Not one, but multiple who are now operating in that same way. Because now what you end up having a group of people. So that my favorite definition of innovation is when two old ideas collide for the first time, and on both sides, there is interest in giving up something in the effort of creating something new, right? So if Satch and I are going to go and create something, and we both are like, no, this is my way, it's never going to happen. It requires what you just talked about, that individual now becoming individuals together to be able to say, I'm curious. What if we took that element, Satch, and stuck that here in this equation? What might happen there? And being really curious about it versus I'm going to set you up so that we can go with my idea, right? Because it really is about innovation comes when people are able to collaborate. Well, people aren't going to collaborate until they feel safe, and they're not going to collaborate until they can become curious. And judgment comes as a result of not feeling safe, right? So it all boils down to this really kind of very simple, back to simplicity. Comes back to a very simple premise. We start with ourselves. We get an oxygen mask on ourselves. We create a culture where people know how and when to put on the oxygen mask, and to recognize, shit, Satch missed the opportunity to put on his oxygen mask. He's starting to faint. Let's make sure he gets some oxygen as a teammate versus there he goes again, being Satch. Two different scenarios. Now I go to Satch and say, hey, Satch, you need your oxygen mask. Here it is. Because I can tell, Satch, you can't. You're the last one to know, by the way, in the room that you're hijacked. Last one. Everybody else knows far before you do because it's a physical manifestation, right? And I don't get to see that. My eyes are pointed out. Yeah. So everybody else sees it. They're able to intervene on my behalf. Now you got a team that's winning. You got a company that's doing that. Momentum is your friend. Yeah.
That's a great analogy. I love that one. That's a great analogy. Yeah.
John, are you familiar with the work of Marshall Rosenberg? And are you familiar with his
nonviolent communication?
Nonviolent communication.
That's right.
Protocol?
Just maybe by title.
Okay.
Maybe tell me what brought your mind there.
Yeah. So a lot of what you're saying applies in our really close personal relationships too. Not just our work relationships, but like conflicts with your mother, father, children, wives, husbands, that kind of thing, where there's deep attachment and things like that, where there have been wounds, there've been conflicts that come up, and the safety thing that you just keep coming back to is crucial for using those protocols effectively. Because instead of focusing in on right and wrong, the focus is shifted away from right and wrong, because we're always right in our own mind, at least from the perspectives that we hold initially. But the focus is instead on addressing the feelings and creating a space where you can actually describe and share your feelings without being attacked for them. Obviously, there's certain conditions such as using responsible language, that doesn't place blame and things like that. But you focus in on even that process of just sharing how you feel or what you felt when such and such happened can enlighten the other person, particularly in their sense of empathy and compassion, to be able to identify why that other person might be feeling the way they feel. And then it becomes easier for them to use their intelligence rather than defense mechanisms to then presuppose that maybe they could relate to that on some level. Maybe they could frame what they experienced as a negative response from that person in a different light. So it just really, really comes home to that, because I see huge success when people apply the principle of sharing feelings and respecting one another's feelings and listening compassionately and feeding it back to them. It creates a safety that allows the two intellects to self-correct, number one, and also collaborate on a solution when necessary too. And of course, I'm talking about people without personality disorders, but people who are everyday people who just experience conflicts, differences of opinion, hurt feelings, misunderstandings, lack of awareness of how their behavior affects the other person, all that kind of normal conflict stuff, I call it, as opposed to the, more psychiatric issues problem. That's a whole different ball of wax. But anyway, everything you're saying just really weaves into the personal stuff too.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of all this. It can't be separated. Right? You don't just arrive home and all of a sudden you're somebody different. I mean, you're the same person, right? You just got out of the car, or just got off the bus or whatever. And so there's my wife's a therapist, and actually one of her supervisors is a woman you probably have heard of. Her name's Esther Perel. She's a
Okay, yeah.
brilliant therapist. She's got some TED Talks. I love the way she talks about relationships. And she talks about how we put so much work and time and energy into the entree, into work. Putting the time into the agenda, the meeting, all the stuff at work, and then we bring leftovers home,
Mm.
right? And how often, right, do we think about, you have dinner and the next day you bring leftovers to work? I mean, some people love leftovers, but I don't know. I kind of like the entree, right? So imagine if we could think about it, though, in such a way that we are creating experiences all the time for the people who are around us, the ones that we love and the ones that we don't know that we're even creating experiences for. And provided those are aligned with our intent, fantastic. And when they're not, how do you address it quickly? How do you address it in a way that people can understand and hear? That fundamentally sets the precedent that this is a safe place to be. That's where we start, right?
You must have some really rich conversations with your wife then, with what you do and with what she does. You guys are primed for really having some very beautifully sensitive and beautifully complex conversations too.
Yeah, well, she, as they say in Texas, I outkicked my coverage. That's the way that they call a relationship. And this is, but I would tell you again, she's incredibly smart. But it goes back to your point, and it's the same as one of the other greatest bosses. This guy JT, I ever worked for. He's one of the smartest people I knew, but he didn't have to tell everybody. The boss that comes in and everybody knows they're the smartest because they tell everybody they're the smartest. Well, that's where the IQ is above the EQ. When EQ is above IQ, now you have someone using their EQ in order to enroll their IQ. JT used his EQ to recognize what are the boundaries I need to create for this guy in a global role so he doesn't hurt himself. But if I create these wide boundaries, I know he's going to go and he's going to do some incredible things. He had to use some serious thinking power to be able to figure out what are those boundaries? How do I keep him safe as a manager of this person? As compared to, I'm just going to use my intellect to solve all of these problems. And so, yes, great therapists, great leaders of people, great managers are the ones who are able and willing to use their IQ in a way that's connected deeply through the EQ, right? So the lens they're looking through is not just the rational lens. It's a lens of both worlds and saying, hey, look, you're going to have to think more comprehensively about how you're showing up in this space. And yes, she is far brighter than I am. So I was blessed with both someone who's much better looking and much smarter than I am in my world. So I don't know how you ever argue with that.
You're a good punter.
Lucky you.
Right.
You outkicked your coverage.
That's right. Yeah. It took the right bounce. Took the right bounce. It's all it was.
Nice.
Well, and for those who are not watching the video, they're listening through Spotify or through iTunes or some other app. John is wearing a shirt that's a black shirt with white letters, and it just says EQ and then a line, and right underneath that it says IQ. So it's EQ over IQ. So for those who don't have the visual cue, that's kind of what's prompted a couple of entrances into the conversation between us.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny. I'm kind of thinking like, what other cues could we invent? And I'm kind of thinking like, what would be the I'm sorry, which cue?
I said PQ, positive intelligence.
Positive intelligence. Yeah, I was gonna say like WQ, your wisdom quotient.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if EQ times IQ is WQ. That's the most advanced math I'm capable of, and that's where it stops, But
I love it, Satch. Actually, that's kind of along the same lines as the PQ thing.
Wiggle your toes.
Yeah, Carmine Shirzad and all that kind of stuff. He talks about neuroscience and that EQ and IQ get you part of the way, and PQ is just a representation of really maximizing the use of all of your IQ. Staying so present in your awareness and sensory cues that you activate the parts of your brain really that handle executive function and curiosity and emotional empathy and humor and creative thinking, out of the box thinking, all that stuff, because you're no longer triggered to go back into coping mechanisms and the parts of the brain that are involved in survival and
Yeah.
avoidance and blame and being a stickler and all of those different kinds of coping
Sure.
that happen for people.
It's great. It makes sense. And, it's really, there's a common thread too, John, everything you talked about today, I felt kept coming back. There's a handful of common themes that we kept coming back to, but the concept of safety, and it's just a quick reminder. We don't have to go any farther than, it's escaped my mind. Maslow's hierarchy. You know what I mean? It's just, you got to be safe or you can't climb the pyramid, so, there it is. But, gosh. So maybe this is a good time, John, to kind of ask you, with your business, like what's on the menu? Like, what do you guys offer? Do you have anything coming up, anything exciting that you want the listeners to know about, hear about?
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks. No, that's always appreciated. Provided people have stuck around long enough to hear us and our banter. That is a great opportunity. Thank you. Yeah. So traditionally, we do a lot of manager and leader development work, really at kind of all levels. And companies that thrive, and we've got some great case studies that show it, are the ones that say we're going to invest in the company. We're not just going to invest in the high potentials or the frontline managers. We're going to invest in the organization, and we're going to make a concerted effort to do it in a strategic way and tied to strategic objectives. So I do a lot of work around strategy execution, and how does that then impact the learning and growth necessary to take those steps? And leadership and management development falls into that space. We do a lot of enterprise-wide stuff around culture, right? The emotional intelligence work has been proven to be a real game changer for cultures, and it's really more, again, about how do people either learn how to articulate that feeling of safety or not feeling safe, or how do you actually start to grow a safer culture and a culture that is paying attention to emotional needs. There's a program called the Covered Bridge program that I've been working on for the last about 2.5 years. And it's essentially around life transitions. I would love to talk to anybody who is interested. We will be running some retreats, probably late Q2, potentially Q3 of this year, where we'll be going away for about 4 days, someplace nice, whether it's Colorado or Vermont. Those are a couple of places that we've got some nice partnerships. And essentially take a group of people who are experiencing some kind of a life quake, or they're in some kind of a reset moment, getting ready for the next chapter. And to be able to press pause and what we call the intentional pause button to prepare for life beyond this chapter, whatever that chapter is, whether it's I'm no longer working because I need to make money, and so I am, quote, retired, but I still got another 30 years on this planet, so I'm not ready to go out to the pasture yet. Or if it's, a mom who's decided to take, 8 or 10 years away from the corporate world and finding their way back, or somebody who's going through a difficult domestic realignment, that might be someone, right? So, but anytime someone is saying, hey, look, I'm struggling with who am I really, like, and beyond just what I do every day. Who am I? And how would I even introduce that to somebody who says, tell me about yourself? Why is it that I'm a cynic fan, but it goes beyond the cynic. Why? It's that purpose and meaning is really a deep learning of yourself and understanding of the things, again, that drive you. People need to go through this with authority, with people who know how to guide, who can give the protection, the direction, and order, because they've researched and they've lived it. So the reason why I studied this is I went through a really tough life transition, a series of life quakes that really rocked my world. And it wasn't until about 1.5 years into the research that I realized, they're doing this work for me. I'm trying to figure out why I am in such a sideways spiral or downward spiral, that I had to figure that out. And then finally, the last piece is you go through it with a group of people. It's what brought us together today, right? The relationship with our common friend, Matt. You went through an experience or a series of experiences with Matt that grew the three of you this bond, right? Well, we all have these experiences in life, whether it's our freshman orientation in college or a sorority or a fraternal organization on a team, a sales training class, whatever it is, where we spend a period of time with people. They become our community of people that we go through this life event with. And oftentimes it's those people that we've never met before, that we have no connection with, that end up being the most meaningful in those moments, because they're both the ones who are going to be most supportive of us and tell us the stuff that maybe we really need to hear too. So keep that in mind. Anybody who wants to know about the Covered Bridge programs, coveredbridgeprogram.com. And you can certainly reach us on our website, authenticausa.com, and either one of those places would be a great place to check in with us.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Love it. Yeah, really love it. I didn't get a chance to ask you very specifically in your personal trajectory, what took you to deciding, I'm going to start a company, I'm going to do consulting, I'm going to jump in this because it's important to me. So if you could just share a little bit about that, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Well, 3 years before I left the corporate world, my boss, old man Sakamoto, came to me and said, "Hey, Briggs, you know what? I think you should leave." And I'll use that in keynotes, and it always brings laughter. But that was 3 years beforehand, and essentially what he was saying is, "Look, you've figured out a sweet spot." I was doing a lot of work, emotional intelligence, a lot of the adaptive. I was doing a lot of speaking, kind of larger groups, and I was also traveling around the world, and I was gone a lot. And so he basically said, "Why don't you go do this on your own? You could do some great work and bring it to more people." So I started to put together a plan, but it was really one pivotal moment. And I tell this when I talk about gratitude and the power of serotonin. And it really came down to the last two conversations that I had with my mom.
Mm.
In early 2013, it's a much longer story, but early 2013, I had my last two conversations with my mom.
Mm.
They were both about 15 minutes long. They were separated by 2 evenings. And the first evening, I told her about this race, the triathlon that I had done. I met a personal best. She had helped me with some training and so forth. Then the second night, I sat down with her and I said, you and Dad have taught me a lot along the way. And I've learned a lot too from the experiences that I've had and the company that invested in me. And I've decided I'm going to leave the corporate world and I'm going to go out on my own. And my quest is to see more gratitude in this world, because if there's more gratitude, the world will be a better place.
Yes.
And my mom said, "No matter where you are, where I am in this moment, I will always be there." And it's this moment that this is a thing that says mom on it. It's just a little butterfly thing, right? And we all have representations. We have something to hold on to.
Yeah.
But I can feel that presence, right? When I'm doing the work that I love, when I'm seeing more gratitude, when I'm seeing people saying, "Oh, wow, this feels good." Like feeling like this feels good. I want more of this. And it's something we can do on our own. We can generate simply by sitting down and saying, "These are the 3 things when I do right now, I'm going to feel better in 5 minutes." Well, shoot, if the world knew more about that, then maybe we'd have more of it. And then, maybe we wouldn't be getting so caught up in who's wearing red hats or black shirts or green socks or whatever. And we could look at each other as human beings who are all on this journey for good, I hope.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's extremely touching, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and authenticity in sharing that. It really struck me how personal that is for you, and very relatable, and also it harkened back to our earlier discussion about expansion. I mean, you're literally describing expanding your purview, and it changed you. You became a larger person as a result of what you did. That's just really beautiful, John. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I couldn't say it any better. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Beautiful. Well, I really have enjoyed this conversation, and I can see that we have a lot of resonance with
Absolutely.
each other.
Absolutely.
An easy flow, and I love that we can brainstorm and talk about things and find commonalities and share uniqueness and all that. So I feel really good about this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
So do
Thank
I.
you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the interest, and I really appreciate the dialogue, because for me, it also leads me to believe that there may be more that the three of us have in front of us, and so maybe we can continue to extend this conversation beyond a podcast
Love
and
it.
talk about ways that, the kinds of things that we're working on, and how we might be able to help each other do more good, because no one's gonna shame us for that one. So
Yeah.
Feels like a green light to me.
Yep.
no, with no pun intended, on St. Patrick's Day. Nicely played.
That's right.
Nicely played.
And I'll just say our common friend Matt was right. We
Yeah.
all needed to get to know each other. He was right.
Yeah.
Yes, I would bet he would be green with envy not being on this call.
Ah, very nice.
But you know what? Maybe today just wasn't his lucky day. So
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Our conversation was very green. It's brand new.
Yeah. All right. I got no puns today. I'm just,
no, that's okay.
yeah,
That's
no
okay.
puns today. Yeah. Yeah.
It ain't
okay.
being green.
It ain't.
As Kermit the Frog once.
Oh, it sure is.
Being green. Yeah. But I can't do an impersonation. So yeah.
You think I had jumped, or I would have gone with the Schwinn or something like that, right? When his bike gets crushed. That was a tough moment. That's his bike. That's his freedom. That's his ticket.
I know.
When I watch the Muppets, I still get touched by it. It really it hits a certain spot.
Yeah.
I
Me
love
too.
it.
And I can't stop laughing every time I picture those long, thin green legs on a bicycle.
I know.
Yeah,
That's so
yeah.
great.
That's
Yeah,
my
it's
favorite.
a classic scene.
Yeah, where the knees are kind of doing this. There's nothing in order. They're kind of just.
I saw that in the theater when I was a kid, and I remember the whole audience laughing when they saw him on the bicycle, doing his.
Me too. Me too.
Great.
My sister took me to that one.
Yeah, very
Beautiful.
good. So
gosh. I think we're at a good place to finish the conversation for now. This was really wonderful. Thank you, John, for being so open, sharing your wisdom and your experiences and your insights into things. Really love this kind of conversation. And Satch, it's always wonderful to dive into this with you.
Once again, we did it again. All right.
Good job, everyone.
All right. John,
Guys,
great to meet you. All
Appreciate
right.
you both. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Very special thanks to our guest today, John Briggs. My name is Oliver Althoen. I produce this show, and I also wrote the theme song, which you're listening to right now. Please connect with us on social media, and you can find our website at authenticityshow.com. Thanks for listening, and have an authentic day.